constructed by Constantine and a series of bishops. They took things out, they added things.
Yeah.
I mean, how, so...
Well, it's not much different. Here's a way of thinking about it.
Okay.
So, I have a friend who's a comic book writer, and I've talked to him a fair bit about archetypes in comics, for example. He was a student of mine at Harvard a long time ago. And the comic book universe is a very interesting one because, obviously, these fictional characters were thought up by single people. And then the fictional characters were transformed into stories, and then the stories were sent out into a broader community. But then what started to happen was the broader community started to stay in contact with the people who were writing the stories, and so if you do something like write Batman now, there's a bunch of things you can't do with Batman, because there's been a collective decision made in the entire community of multiple writers and the entire community of multiple readers that have decided that there's a core story that has a certain structure and certain elements. And so there's this collective process of imagination that's gone into constructing what you might describe as a heroic meta-narrative. And the reason I'm using that as an example is because there isn't a lot of difference, perversely enough, in the construction, say, of comic book heroes and the construction of religious deities. And I'm not saying that religious deities are nothing but comic book characters. Or maybe I'm elevating comic book characters beyond the status that they normally attain. But if you think about this, for example, with regards to something like the construction of the recent Marvel universe, I mean, those Avengers movies are among the most expensive technological artifacts that human beings have ever made. And they drive our computational capacity to its absolute limit. And the reason for that is because we're using that fictional space to lay out an archetypal and mythological view of the universe. It's a practice domain for modes of being. And I mean, in the Marvel universe, obviously Tony Stark, Iron Man, is technological man, right? He's trying to develop a real relationship with his partner, Pepper Potts, who's, her own sort of independent woman. And he's attempting to use technology to build himself up into something that has the status of approximately a god, to transcend mortal limitation and all of that. So there's a deity-like aspect, the growth of a deity emerging there, and then of course Thor and Loki they're not comic book deities at all. They're actual deities. They're the hostile brothers. It's an archetypal pair like Christ and Satan, or Batman and the Joker, or Superman and Lex Luthor, and that's the good part of the individual against the evil part of the individual, roughly speaking. That's played out in these myths. And so that collective process that you describe, whereby an entire group of people comes together to decide what the central religious text is. And on the one hand, you can think of that as the gerrymandering of a religious process. Maybe that's something that's only devoted towards the acquisition of power, like that would be a Marxist analysis. But on the other hand, you can think of it as the collective imagination attempting to build a dramatic, to build an exemplary drama that everyone can act out. And it's in acting out that exemplary drama that we are actually able to interact in a civilized and productive manner. Like, look at this discussion that we're having to the degree that it's working. We're both trying to articulate our notions of reality. And I do that, you listen, and maybe you have some comments, and then you do that, and I listen, and maybe you have some comments. But together we're building something that's different from what we both came in here with, right? And in a sense, what we're doing is we're participating in the process of articulating each other's spirits. And I mean that most technically. Like, part of your spirit is an amalgam of the information that you've encountered. A lot of that's articulated wisdom. And so it's soul construction. If you're having a good conversation, and that's also a conversation that is meaningful, and you can tell that when you're having it, it's that you're decomposing parts of yourself, your false presuppositions, you're letting them die, and you're letting something new be born as an alternative. And you're participating in this process of death and rebirth constantly when you're having a meaningful conversation. It's like, oh, that was wrong. I'm going to let that die. Ooh, that's a little painful. I was kind of attached to that concept, but I'll let it go. I'll let it burn off. And a new part of you will emerge. And then another part dies, and a new part emerges. And that's this process of eternal death and rebirth. It's part of the general mythology of redemption. You see that all the time, too, in the Harry Potter series, for example. At the very end of the Harry Potter series, Potter undergoes a literal death and rebirth. And that's how he finally defeats evil. These stories are deeply built into people. There's a reason that J.K. Rowling became the richest person in England. She's richer than the Queen. She got rich by telling the story properly. And the second volume of Harry Potter, when there's the basilisk underneath the castle that turns you to stone when you look at it, that's everything that people are afraid of. That freezes you like a rabbit freezes when it sees a wolf. And the story in Harry Potter is you go underneath the castle to where the thing that frightens you the most resides, and you face it down. And in doing that, you free the Virgin, right? That's St. George. He frees Virginia in the Harry Potter story. And maybe you half die because of that, because he gets bitten by that basilisk and just about dies. And then it's the phoenix that saves him, because the phoenix is the spirit of death and rebirth. These stories, they come up everywhere. There's no avoiding them. And it's because they're true. But they're not true like scientific truths. They're a behavioral truth, or a pragmatic truth, or a dramatic truth. And part of the reason that our society is so damn unstable now, and part of the reason all this weird chaos is emerging, this is a consequence of Nietzsche's observation back from the late 1800s about the death of God. We blew the metaphysical foundations out from underneath our culture. And the whole thing is shaking and twisting. And it's vacillating between the horrors of the extreme right and the horrors of the extreme left. It's been doing that for 140 years, and we're in the throes of that again. We blew the metaphysical foundations out from underneath our culture. And we need to get them back. Part of the reason that people are so obsessed by things like the Avengers movies and the superheroes and Harry Potter and all of that is because, and Star Trek and Star Wars, is because our collective imagination is trying to regroup at the level of drama and reformulate our fundamental metaphysics.
I was reading this thing that was they were equating CrossFit and yoga to religion. And they were saying it's essentially religion for people that have abandoned traditional religions. Is that the idea is that what we're seeking is camaraderie, order, and discipline, and some sort of a shared community experience. So when you're talking about, when you're saying your religion, you're not talking about a literal translation like a guy actually came back from the dead. What you're talking about is the concepts and the thoughts and the harmonious frequency that is achieved when people follow the tenets of that religion and live by these laws, as you're saying, of stacking on these ideas. Is this good for you? Is it good for the community? Is it good for the community in 5 years, in 10 years? And that's what you're saying when you're talking about your belief in love of religion.
But the other thing about that is that, like, imagine that there's a pathological mode of being that's so terrible that when you enact it, you just die. Like, good drug addiction will do that for you if you pursue that. Meth addiction, pursue that for about 10 years, and you'll descend to the lower levels of hell, and then you'll die. Right. Well, so then you might say, well, what's at the opposite end of that? What would be the final manifestation of a mode of life that was revivifying and healthy? How redemptive and rejuvenating would that be? And I would say the answer to that is that we don't know. We have no idea. And these ideas of death and rebirth are definitely true on the micro level. Like, so the developmental psychologist Piaget said, for example, that when you incorporated new information, however you did that, learning or conversation, that new information would exist in contradiction to something that you already presumed. And so that thing you presumed would have to disintegrate and die. And then something new would be born. That can happen at different levels of analysis. So sometimes you learn something minor. And sometimes you're shook to your bloody core, and you undergo a descent into the underworld fundamentally, sometimes even a descent into hell. That's where you get genocidal and resentful. And then maybe you're lucky and you pop up reborn. Well, those exist as constant metaphysical truths. That's how human beings transform. And we don't know the upper limits of that transformation. We have no idea what that might be. Because I don't know, for example, how healthy you could be if you were as healthy as you could be, if you straightened yourself out completely. I don't know what limits you could transcend, and neither does anybody else. So we don't know the upper limits of the truth of these religious stories. Now, we do know what happens if you let go of it badly. You end up with something like the Soviet Union or Mao's China,
which were both based on, they were atheists.
Yeah, they were secular. They dispensed, for Marx, religion was the opiate of the masses. It's not like I don't understand that. I understand that. But it's another one of those situations where it's like, religion is the opiate of the masses. Yeah, and it's also 50 other things. And you don't want to forget those, like, really, we know, for example, from anthropological studies, religious belief is a human universal. And the reason for that, in part, is because there is a distinction between good and evil. And there is a distinction between good and bad. Otherwise, you wouldn't do anything. Like, you're always striving for the good. I mean, unless you've taken a malevolent turn. It's a natural impulse in human beings to make what is better. Well, it means we have a deeply inbuilt sense of what constitutes better.
And we're all aware of that harmonious state that's achieved in
Well,
community.
the thing that's interesting about it, like one of the things that Nietzsche thought was, after he announced the death of God, was that people would be able to create new values. And Carl Jung took issue with that. He was a student of Nietzsche's, and he pointed out basically that, well, wait a minute. Who says you can create your own values? You can't even get yourself out of bed to go exercise in the morning. You're not under your own control. Maybe we could rediscover the values that we once held. And that's the descent into the underworld and the resurrection of the Father. That's what happens in Pinocchio, for example. You know, when Pinocchio goes down into the depths to face Monstro and revitalize his dead father. There's a reason that movie was made in the 1930s and why it was so popular. It's like, you want to get rid of your damn strings and stop being an erotic jackass. And that's what the story's about. Is you go down to the bottom of the ocean, you find the thing you're most afraid of, you face it, you rescue your dead father from the depths, and you rise back to the surface with him. That's what our culture has to do. That's what our culture has to do.
Now, when you say that you're a religious person, though, people automatically assume that there's, especially in this country, the religious right is a very dogmatic and very simplistic view of what God wants, and it's lumped into no homosexuals, certain restrictions on the behavior of women. If you look at the Bible, and the Bible is obviously a reflection of the people that lived at the time where it was constructed, although even trying to figure out when that is, it was an oral tradition for thousands of years, but it was ever written down, written in ancient Hebrew, translated to Latin and Greek, Roman, or in English rather.
Well, there's always a tension in religions between the dogmatic element and the spiritual element.
Right.
And conservatives, technically speaking, tend to marshal themselves on the sides of the more rule-oriented and dogmatic elements of religion. Liberals, roughly speaking, tend to marshal themselves more on the spiritual side.
And that's because of the distinction that you were saying earlier about the behavior patterns of people that tend to be conservative.
Yeah, it's conscientiousness versus openness, roughly speaking. And I mean, the dogmatic structures are necessary. The dogma is necessary because it conserves the structure. But the spiritual aspect is necessary because it updates the structure. And there's always this tension, and there's a tension in people. It's like, you have to believe things or you couldn't exist, you couldn't act. You have to hold on to the dogmatic structure of your belief. But you have to be open for its update on a continual basis. And that's basically consciousness. Seriously speaking, consciousness is the thing that tends to the unknown into the anomaly and integrates it with the structure. And there's meaning to be found in that too. That's boldly go where no one has gone before, in the words of the Star Trek writers. That's something that deeply appeals to young people when they watch that sort of thing. But so what the fundamentalists are doing is they're trying to hold on to their tradition. And it's no bloody wonder, because if the tradition falls apart, you end up isolated and drowning in the ocean alone. But if the tradition gets too intense and restricted, well then you're just clones in a prison, and that's these two forms of hell. In a sense, they meet. If they get extreme enough, they meet. The hell of absolute chaos and the hell of absolute order, and the conservatives tend towards the hell of absolute order, and the left liberal types tend towards the hell of absolute chaos. There's some point in the middle. That's the line between yin and yang, by the way, because that's order and chaos. And the Taoists say, well, that's life, that's existence, order and chaos. And order is the place you are when what you do works, and chaos is where you are when what you do doesn't work. And no matter where you go, order and chaos exist, and your job is to be right on the border between those. And that's to live in Tao, that's to live in meaning, and that's that same place where all these things stack up. And so with regards to religious tradition, on the one hand, you have to maintain the tradition. It's like maintaining the Constitution in the U.S. On the other hand, you have to be awake and alert because the tradition is a dead thing, right? It was composed by dead people in the dead past. It can't respond as flexibly as it should to the demands of the present. That's up to you, and you do that with your vision, with your capacity to see, and with your capacity to articulate. And forever, really. The major deities that mankind have produced, Marduk for the Mesopotamians, and Osiris or Horus for the Egyptians, and Christ for the Christians, and Buddha for the Buddhists. These have been people who were noted for their vision, for their ability to watch and pay attention. Because there's nothing more important than the ability to pay attention. Pay attention and speak the truth, your truth. And that's how you keep everything stacked up in order harmoniously. That's how you keep the balance between order and chaos. That's how you articulate your being. That's how you revivify the world. That's how you rescue your dead father from the bottom of the ocean. That's how you adopt your responsibility as a citizen. That's how you live a proper life. And a proper life, I know what a proper life is, because I thought about this for a long time. Life is suffering. And suffering can make you resentful, murderous, and then genocidal if you take it far enough. So you need an antidote to suffering. And maybe, you could think, well, I'll build walls of luxury around myself and that'll protect me from the suffering. It's like, well, good luck with that, because that isn't going to work. And maybe you can build a delusion and live inside that, but that's going to fall apart. Well, what is there that helps you fight against suffering? That's easy. That's the truth. The truth is the antidote to suffering. And the reason for that is because the truth puts reality behind you so that you can face the reality that's coming straight at you without becoming weak and degenerating and becoming resentful and wishing for the destruction of being. Because that's the final hell. The final hell is your soul wishing for the destruction of everything because it's too painful and you're too bitter. And that happens to people all the time.
Now, as a person who is someone who's extremely critical of ideologies, a lot of people would think it's a contradiction for you to embrace religion, because religion being the biggest and oldest ideology of all.
Ideology is a parasite on religious substructures. You can't, look, we could go back to the Harry Potter example. That's a good example. I mean, J.K. Rowling was reading like 400-page books, right? She could fill a stadium when she was reading. Why? It's because she got the archetypes right. She got the religious sub-narratives correct. They're not ideologies. Ideologies work because an ideology is a parasite on top of a religious substructure. And a religious narrative has a particular set of characteristics. It's very balanced. So, for example, there's the feminist idea of patriarchy. Well, the religious idea of society has an evil patriarchy notion built into it. That would be the dying king, the once great dying king. You see this in the Egyptian story of Osiris, for example, who's eventually chopped up by his evil brother. You see it in the Lion King with Mufasa and Simba's father and Simba's evil uncle. Those are the two representatives of the patriarchy, the wise king and the tyrannical king. In a religious story, probably set up archetypal story, there's the natural world, the chaotic world, there's a positive element and a negative element. There's the social world, there's the wise king and the tyrannical king. And there's the individual world, and that's the adversary and the hero. There's always a positive and a negative at each level. And it stops it from being an oversimplification, because it says to you, well, of course, bloody society has an oppressive patriarchy. But it's also the wise father that has taught you to speak every word you know. It's like, you don't get to say only this part of the story without having gratitude for this part of the story. And it's true, at each level of the representation, a properly balanced story has got the balance between positive and negative always correct.
Is that in many ways like a lot of people who are anti-Western capitalism are also the only, they will find that capitalism and Western capitalism in particular is the only culture that has embraced the acceptance of people like transgender people, people who are gay, people who are marginalized. Western capitalist society is one of the very few cultures that openly abhors racism.
Right. Right. Well, and these people are anti-capitalist on their iPhones. Right. You don't get to do that. Right. It's a performative contradiction.
That's so important.
Yeah, they're on their iPhones while they're flying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
While
like,
they're
well, I'm
flying.
anti-capitalist. It's like, well, actually, no, you're not. You're just deeply confused. That's
Yeah.
what you are. Just deeply confused.
It's not capitalism that's the problem. It's evil that's the problem.
It's also it's a deeper problem. Evil is a problem. So there's a religious scholar named Mircea Eliade who looked at flood myths, because there are flood myths all over the world. God gets fed up, floods everything. It's like just like in New Orleans. So here's the funny thing about New Orleans. What caused the New Orleans flood? Well, hurricane.
No.
Yeah? No. How about human corruption? How about the corruption of the state? How about the fact that people knew the damn dikes weren't going to hold? That the levees weren't going to hold? How about that they knew that for 100 years and didn't care? How about that they pocketed the money that should have gone for the repair? And so in flood myths, you always see two things. You see that, I'm paraphrasing, say, there's a storm, there's dikes, and there's people responsible for maintaining the dikes. Well, the storm won't wipe out the city. It could. But if the dikes are high enough, then it won't. And if people aren't corrupt, then they build the dikes properly. And so God floods the world when the dikes have rotted and the people have become corrupt. And it's a very old story, and it's disseminated everywhere. And the reason is well, we inhabit a social structure that's old and dead. Our infrastructure is decayed. Our political, economic, and practical infrastructure has decayed. Well, why? It's old. Everything decays. Okay, everything's always decaying. That's dangerous. And corrupt people don't do a very good job of keeping it ordered. And so if things get old and decayed enough, and if people get corrupt enough, then God floods the world. Why? Because that's what happens. Over and over and over and over and over.
And you don't mean God in the literal sense of the word. You mean God as these are the consequences to these type of actions. You are not prepared
you could say
for what you
transcendent reality.
Right.
You could look at it that way. You know, and I mean the idea of God is a very, very complicated idea, but you could say, if you were thinking about it merely from an intellectual perspective, is you could say that God is what transcends your knowledge. That's all. It's what you don't know. It's what's outside of your knowledge structures. And there's a very old story, and this goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel, is that one of the things that characterizes authoritarians is that there's never anything outside of their knowledge structures. They make their knowledge structures absolute. So in the Tower of Babel, human beings build this structure that's supposed to reach all the way to heaven, so that we can invade the place of the gods. Well, God has none of that. He just blows it apart and throws people all over the world. And it's a very early, dramatic representation of the danger of human hubris. And the hubris is, we know everything. There's nothing that needs to be left outside of what we know. It's like, no, that's what God is. God is what's always outside of what you know.
Is the problem with the term God? Though people think of God as being a man. They think of it being a person. They even use the masculine pronouns in reference to God. I mean, that's one of the funniest things about God, calling him a he.
Well, it's a problem. I mean, and that's certainly been a problem. Jung talked about that a lot, about the exclusion of the feminine within the domains of classic Judeo-Christian thought, for example. I mean, you have Mary, who's a kind of quasi-deity, who pops in sort of like as a fourth member of the Trinity, but the exclusion of the feminine is definitely a conceptual problem. Is the fact that God is conceptualized as a human being or as a man a problem? It's a problem and a solution. I mean, if you remove the human element of God, then God gets so abstract that it's easy for him to float off into space and to never show up again. You lose the human connection. I mean, the way the Catholics solve that to some degree is that they have God who's sort of at the top of the hierarchy, and then they have this hierarchy of saints who are sort of like gods, but half human, and then they have human beings at the bottom. And that allows for a continual chain of communication between the highest level of abstraction and the actual concrete person. But the other thing that's useful about the conceptualization of God in anthropomorphic terms is that, and this is worth noting, there is nothing more complex in the cosmos than a human being. So if you're looking for something to represent the ultimate in complexity, it's hard to beat a human being. So your brain is ungodly complicated, so to speak. So, I mean, these things are obviously too complicated to unpack in a
Yeah, I didn't expect us to even get into this conversation, but I'm glad we did. Do you think that these stories exist because somewhere in our code, somewhere in our very being, we understand that there is a need for this order, to find this frequency?
They're an expression of our deepest being. They're an expression of how it is that we must live in order to live.
In order to reach our full potential.
Even more than that. More than that. Even to avoid hell. And you can think about hell as Nazi Germany if you want. You can think about it as the Soviet Gulag Archipelago or Mao's Cultural Revolution. Like, we can get there, no problem. If you walk down in some of the seedier areas in LA, you'll see people in hell, no problem.
Sure, go to Skid Row.
Yes, and you can tell when those people are there because they will get angry if you look at them. And you'll walk a big berth around them. You're not going to come within 10 feet of the, let's call it, psychogeography of their existence. Right, and that they're in a place. It's a metaphysical place, but it's not defined by the damn geography.
Right.
You know, Skid Row is as much of a psychological place as it is a physical place. In fact, it's more a psychological place, but that doesn't make it any less a place. And if you're descend into the hell of Skid Row deep enough, you'll get to the point where most of your thoughts are murderous. And that's hell as a suburb of the underworld, fundamentally. That place exists. People visit it all the time. And sometimes they don't get out. It's real.
I've been discussing this a lot recently because people like to talk about the concept of apocalypse, that we're headed towards an impending apocalypse. And my thought is that apocalypse is already here, it's just not right here.
Yeah, it's always here.
Go to Liberia. Go to Liberia and look at people defecating in the streets and eating human flesh. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Vice piece on Liberia, but it's unbelievably terrifying how people live there.
The apocalypse is an archetypal idea, and the apocalypse is always here. And it's here at the micro level. Like, when we have a discussion in our concepts of change, there's micro apocalypses. Little bits of our being will be blown apart and restructured. And that can be at a small scale or a large scale, or it can get to the point where everything collapses and is destroyed. And life is apocalyptic in that matter because we all get sick, we all die, our families are vulnerable. There's an apocalyptic element to being, and we have to face that and confront it and deal with it properly. And the wrong way to deal with it is to generate more hell than heaven, I suppose. And to do that consciously. And people do that all the time, too. There's never a situation that's so bad that there isn't something you can do to make it worse. And there's very seldomly a time when you're not motivated at some level of your being to put the knife in and twist it just one more quarter turn. People are like that. And we have reason. Life is hard. It's no wonder people get corrupted by it. It's not an easy thing to live in a... It's not an easy thing to live, let's say, in a truthful manner. But the alternative is hell. Part of the reason that I made these videos to begin with is because I learned a lot about the importance of spoken truth as the countervailing force against tyranny and authoritarianism. It isn't an alternative political structure that's the countervailing force. It's spoken truth that's the countervailing force. It's like, well, why would I put my job on the line to have an opinion about compelled pronouns? I know why. Because the ability to speak your truth is the bulwark against hell. And losing your job? That's nothing. That's nothing compared to where things can go when they go badly. For me, it was just preventative. It's like, this isn't going in a good direction. Well, should you take a risk? It's like, you don't have that choice. You're silent? That's a risk. Now, most people don't understand the risks of silence. I happen to understand the risks of silence because I've been studying them for 40 years.
Is it frustrating for you to get so little support for these actions and for your protests?
Well, I wouldn't say that that's what happened.
And I don't mean so little support because you get a lot of support outside of the university.
It's okay. It doesn't matter where the support comes from. Like, I mean, it's disappointing in the same way that it's disappointing for me to say I think the universities now do more harm than good. That's disappointing, but it doesn't. It's not surprising to me. Like, it isn't as if intellectuals are characterized by an intrinsic moral superiority. Oh, they're smart, so they'll leap to the defense of what's right. It's like, no, there's no evidence for that. Intelligence and moral wisdom aren't the same thing. Like, and if you're corrupt and smart, all that makes you is way more treacherous. It doesn't make you less likely to be corrupt. It just makes you much more. You're 50 snakes instead of 2. Or you're 56-headed snakes instead of 2. Like, I've had clients who had very serious personality disorders, who were very intelligent. It's like, that's not necessarily a good thing for them. They're just better at arguing for their pathology to themselves.
That is a real problem where people automatically assume that intelligent people are going to be healthy.
Yeah, well, they're healthy in that often they do better in the world, you know, because
more
their skills
successful.
their skills are more marketable and so on. But there's no evidence that there's any relationship between intelligence and morality. I mean, God, let me tell you a story, man. One time I had this client. This woman was just ruined. She looked like a street person, you know, and she had very dirty clothes, and she was so shy that she couldn't even approach you. She had to shield her eyes from you as if you were emitting light, and she did that to everyone on the street. Like, she was bent over and humble, like a Chinese peasant brought before the emperor, you know. And one of the things I was doing with her in behavior therapy was trying to just get her to present herself in a more normal manner so that people wouldn't shy away from her and, you know, be instantly prejudiced towards her. And she'd come to the behavior therapy clinic, and she wasn't bright, this woman. I think she had only had like a 7th grade education. She was quite intellectually impaired, and she lived with her sick aunt who was schizophrenic and who had a satanically possessed alcoholic boyfriend that was always tormenting my client. She lived in absolute hell. But she had this dog, and she used to take it out and walk the dog all the time. And then she'd actually come to the behavior therapy clinic, partly because of her own problem, but she'd come to this place called the Douglas Hospital, and she'd been an inpatient in the Douglas Hospital. And in the Douglas Hospital, there were these long-term psychiatric clients, and they looked like something out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting or Dante's Inferno. I mean, this was way worse than One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. These people were seriously destroyed, and they couldn't be let back out in the streets during deinstitutionalization. Like, they were lifers. And she had decided that part of the reason she wanted to come to the hospital was because she had been institutionalized there, and she thought that maybe when she took her dog out for a walk, she could go and get one of those damn inmates and take them out for a walk too. Now, that was a person who was moral, dumb as a post, just screwed in 50 different directions. Nothing going for her. And she had the bloody moral capacity to decide that there was someone worse off than her, and believe me, that wasn't easy to find, and that maybe she could do them some good if the hospital would let her, which they didn't, by the way. Yeah, well, that's the story of the soul. That's not the intellect, that's for sure. So I didn't expect any support from my colleagues. And it isn't that I don't care if I got it. It's in some sense, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to me. Because my goal was, I'm not saying those goddamn pronouns. And the reason I'm not saying them is because they're made up by left-wing ideologues. And I don't like left-wing ideology. I don't like ideology, period. And I know where corruption of speech leads. And I'm not going there. And you know, one of the things I tried to learn when I was taking apart what happened in Auschwitz and trying to put myself in the position of an Auschwitz camp guard, which, by the way, you can do if you use your imagination a bit. I wouldn't call it exactly the world's most pleasant meditative experience, but you can call up parts of yourself that would be capable of taking someone who just got off a transport train and having them carry a 100-pound sack of wet salt from one side of the camp compound to the other and back. You can conjure that part of yourself up if you want, and that'll teach you something about what you're like. People don't do it because it's too frightening, but I know perfectly well that I could do that sort of thing. And so once I learned that I could do that sort of thing, and maybe that I could even enjoy it, I thought, okay, fine, I get it. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to live so that if that opportunity was presented to me, I wouldn't take it. And I think that's the lesson that people need to learn from the 20th century. It's like, that's what human beings did, okay? Well, we're all human, okay? So how is it that we should live so that we don't do that again? Well, part of that is to try to say the truth. No matter what, because the alternative is worse, and it is worse.
The truth no matter what, and that is the real problem that you see with being forced into using these made-up pronouns.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my language. I'll take responsibility for what I say. I am not saying your words.
And being compelled to say the words by law.
Well, that makes it that takes it past the point of absurdity to the point of tyranny, in my estimation.
And I've seen some criticisms where people are saying, you know, he's talking about this, but really he's grandstanding because no one's doing anything legally. But the potential exists.
Oh, that's such rubbish.
But that is one of the arguments.
Criminal. Yes, they wouldn't have changed the damn criminal. They put it in the hate speech category and altered the criminal code. It's as simple as that. And then you could say, well, no, we didn't really mean it. It's like, oh yeah, you did. You really meant it. Two of the social justice warriors that have debated me in the last 2 months accused me directly of hate speech. All I had to do was poke them a tiny bit, and they came right out with it. And then the university's legal team reviewed everything I said carefully, believe me, and they decided that, oh, it was not only illegal to not use these compelled pronouns, it was probably illegal to make a video saying that I wouldn't use them. Because otherwise, why would they write me a warning letter and tell me that I violated university policy on the Ontario Human Rights Act? Think I did that lightly?
Have they acted on this at all? Is there?
Well, they won't know. Well, they've acted in that they sent me 2 warning letters and told me to stop talking. And the idea that I was going to be teaching in January again, because I teach all my undergraduate courses from January to May, that was on the table. And I think the only reason that it hasn't happened, one of the reasons it hasn't happened, and I'm not attributing nothing but malevolence to the university administration, because obviously it's very complicated, and they did agree to host a debate, for example. But the idea that I wouldn't be teaching in January, and still might not be, is by no means. That was a perfectly plausible outcome. And had this not caused a firestorm, much of which has emerged in support of me, then I would say there was a 50-50 chance that I would have my teaching privileges revoked. It's happened to other professors. So the idea that I'm making that this is a tempest in a teapot, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. Why'd you change the criminal code then? And why'd you put it under the hate speech laws? Exactly. So, no, doesn't wash. And the fundamental proof of that is the university's response, because for sure their legal team crafted those letters. You know, it was like, recalcitrant employee, you're responsible for it. Okay, what do you do with a recalcitrant employee? You write them a letter telling them what they're doing wrong and asking them to stop. Then if they don't stop, you write them a second letter that's more strongly worded. Then if they don't stop, you write them a third letter, even more strongly worded. Then you take disciplinary action. That's like HR 101. That's how you do it. So
here we sit at the end of November, closing on December. You're literally a bit more than a month away, and you don't know whether or not you're teaching your courses in January?
It seems highly probable that I'll be teaching them. I wouldn't say it's certain, but if I'm teaching them, it's because the cost of having me not teach them would now be too high. It's not because the university believes that what I'm doing is either necessary or acceptable.
If someone who's listening to this or watching this feels compelled to act out in your support, how can they do that?
I think they could do the future offering exercise.
And that would be the best way to act out in your support.
Yes, and I'm dead serious about this. It's like, sort yourself out.
Sort yourself out before you try to figure out the world. And that's the primary objective. That's your most important thing that you can do. Sort yourself out.
Sort yourself out and marshal your arguments and put yourself in order so that when someone pushes you a little farther than you should go, You can say no.
And you know what's going on now. I think that's outstanding advice. That's very, very important advice. And I think this has been one of my favorite podcasts ever.
No shit.
Really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate you having the courage to stick your neck out. And I appreciate also your incredibly well thought out arguments for those actions. So thank you.
Thank you.
How do people get a hold of your YouTube page? What is your YouTube page? What's the address?
Jordan Peterson Videos.
Jordan Peterson Videos on YouTube.
Yep.
And do you use Twitter? I know I put your Twitter page out, but you use it. So,
Yep.
And that is Jordan
B. Peterson. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Really, really appreciate it. It was an honor.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
See ya. Got a publicist with you, huh?
No, dude, yeah, she didn't want me to do this without. I was
Definitely don't chew that on the air. Boom! We're live. People are gonna get mad at you chewing that on the air. They're hearing it right now. They're like, God damn it, John Jones.
almost finished.
What's up, viewer? Welcome to the stream.
I want to go back to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protests? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protests. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why were they here?
Well, how can I
Are there views in alignment with yours? At some point,
That's
you
a
realize.
foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are,
I've watched all of your videos, yes. Including yes, I have.
then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
Apparently,
That's
all
All of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
do you want to disavow?
150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay.
Do you want to disavow the
Can
support?
you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really think that you're worth all of that time?
So, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
That sounds very much like a
they're
threat.
going to come.
That sounds very much like a threat. That sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence? So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to, and I'm going to post this online, but you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would
I'm a
like
person of
to
color.
no
Listen,
violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating. I felt like my voice had been myself over Muslim, and I feel like this guy. I'm a person of color. There are many Muslims.
You wanted to disavow. You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavow. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence. And violence is lurking. And you can say that that sounds like a threat.
There was no violence at our protest, though. There was violence at your protest. So what does that say about our
It's
views?
not my protest. You know, asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
Is that your medical
Like,
opinion?
why? Is that your medical opinion? Like, you are aware that non-binary people are valid in the American Psychological Association.
Is that your opinion?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
It's about non-binary pronouns.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I'm saying that that's what
What's up, bro?
Were you there when I spoke?
I've been here for this whole thing.
Okay, well, I don't know that. It's a genuine question. Look, I think that's what's happening is that we're pushing over a line we shouldn't cross. The newest legislation is requiring people to use.
But you are aware that that's being put in place so that we can't get fired. We need to be written into the Canada human rights legislation, or we can be fired for our gender identity. Okay, then why'd you make a fucking video about it? I've been denied housing as a trans person. These rights would protect me.
Denied housing?
I've been denied housing.
From the state or for the open market? So you've been denied housing, like, from the government?
It's illegal either way if we had human rights.
From the government?
I'm
Or
not-
have you tried to get a house like everybody else, and they said, no, you're weird, you can't work? No, if the state does it, that's a problem.
They said-
But if someone doesn't want to live with you, that's their right.
They said, no, you're trans. So no, if I had human rights, that wouldn't have fucking happened.
That's weird. Everyone is
As far as I'm concerned, that's a terrible thing. It's too bad that that's happening.
So you don't want us to, but you don't want us to have protections in the human rights bill that will allow me to have employment, allow me to have housing security, allow me to have medical care. That's what this is about. It's not about infringing on your rights and making you learn a new fucking pronoun.
I don't think that's what it's about. What evidence do you have that attempting to transform the way that people use pronouns is going to produce a positive effect?
Because are you aware that there was a trans boy who killed himself in psychiatric care recently because he was continuously being misgendered by his care workers? And there have been multiple reported instances of trans people killing themselves because they are not being integrated into society. We are not looking for special treatment. We are looking to be able to integrate ourselves into society. And if you refuse to refer to us by our pronouns, which is not allowed to ask, singular they pronouns go all the way back to Shakespeare. It's not a new thing. If you refuse to let us integrate ourselves into society, you create alienation that results in suicide. We are in a suicide epidemic right now. What are you contributing to this as a psychologist?
Man, you're almost impossible to talk to. You're so full of rhetoric that it's impossible to listen to you. I would be more than happy to listen to rhetoric.
Yeah, really.
Rhetoric. And I don't really think I am a rhetorician. Just so you know that. And it's very hard to listen to you. I mean, it's very hard to attend to you.
Because
you rattle on with your ideological speech.
It's not ideological. It's personal. That's what
It's not personal. You haven't said a personal thing.
I'm talking about something that affects my community.
It's just that when you say the things that you say, it tends, even if you didn't mean it to, it attracts people like you're not. The fact that having what you're saying.
I ended up finishing that podcast, and now I'm very fucking interested in this guy. Like, holy shit.
They see an avenue in that to continue to spread their hateful ideology and to create more people. So that's why the Nazis come here. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that's why that was.
I'm perfectly aware of it.
I have a calm, rational question. I won't get emotional with you. Who is this legislation harming? Who is
harming anybody who wants to use their own words?
So, in what capacities? Be specific.
Look, it's important that people are able to use their own words.
Okay.
Because that's how we think. And if the government starts legislating how we think...
So if I wanted to call you she... I'm playing off of what you're saying. If I wanted to call you she and her and miss, because that's my freedom of speech, and if everyone just called you that all the time, and that was the only thing.
Can't you tell?
I think that you don't care because you've never had to face that. And it's a common trend among people who have never had to face transgender-related discrimination that you think it's not a big deal because you don't have to deal with
I didn't say I
it.
didn't think it was a big deal. I said I didn't care if people called me that.
Public confusion, but it does prevent us from access. It does prevent us from access.
I'm not arguing about your rights.
Yes, you
Yes, you are.
It's
about our rights.
I'm
sorry, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you realize that right now, if you were to kill a trans person, because only for the sole reason that they're trans, that would not be considered a hate crime. Sure, they could be convicted of murder, but not of a hate crime. And that's what this
mistakes. They can use trans
yeah.
in the United States and get off by claiming temporary insanity because they were freaked out by the trans person.
I am not claiming for a moment that people who don't fit into standard and traditional sexual categories or sexual identity categories
This is about
don't
gender,
face
though.
all sorts of trouble.
They do. I just don't think that this is the way to fix it. I
Do
think
you not think that a law that legislates protections for discrimination for trans people
not
is
this way.
you do not think that true?
I don't think.
Have you read the laws are intentionally worded?
Bring as many.
Most laws involving human rights.
As much trouble to as many people as possible.
What will we gain? What will we gain from
There is
that?
a conspiracy of
I didn't say it
intent.
was a conspiracy.
There is a concentrated effort behind these bills in order to specifically make the lives of people worse, and that's why we create human rights to make it
I think
harder
that
for
people.
people to
I
live
think
their
that people
lives.
often do things to make other people's lives worse. Don't you?
Well, clearly, as an example of this rally.
I am probably the most fervent anti-statist you will ever meet. I am an anarchist, and I do not believe that anyone who writes legislation has the interest of anybody but themselves and their special interests. So don't come after me saying that I want to suck off the nipple of the government, okay? Because that's not who I am. What I'm interested is in that people I love are being assaulted, are being killed, are being discriminated against, are being kicked out onto the streets, are freezing to death in the winter because
I'm
they're being
against
denied
that
shelter. And I feel
But pronouns are too much to ask for you to show solidarity towards those people. Sorry.
Look, we agree, and this is a thing that's happening. We agree that it's a reprehensible thing.
Okay, sure, let's agree on that.
I mean, I don't think that would be controversial to most people. I mean,
I agree.
Apparently, some people think. Apparently, to some people, we're freaks because we can't have families or whatever. But okay, whatever. Maybe that's not something you agree with. I don't know. I'm not going to.
Definitely not something I agree.
What I fail to understand is how you honestly feel, in your expert opinion, as both an educator, as an educated person, that not calling somebody by a pronoun that has been used to refer to
No, I think
individual
it's
people.
legislating it. It's legislating it as a necessity, but I have no objection.
Okay, so if there was this legislation was not on the table, if this legislation fails, let's say, if this is removed, you would be totally fine referring to me with they them pronouns.
Probably not they and them.
Probably not they and them. Why is
No.
that?
Well, because I don't think it's a tenable solution.
A
I don't think
solution
it's
to what?
I don't think it's a solution to the problem that you're trying to solve. I mean, it's not.
You don't
Look,
think it's
it's
basic
not that
respect?
easy to translate. I know that's how you.
You were literally saying
You can make up a word and make that a child's name, and you would refer to them by that name. Why is it different for a pronoun?
You're so
Well, it's different because it's different. Because
No,
it's a pronoun.
it's just as you were just asked.
It's different because it's a pronoun for a lot of reasons.
So you
And
would
one of the reasons it's different is that pronouns turn out to be very difficult to change. They're closed linguistic.
Which is why we're using they them pronouns, which has historical continuity.
Yeah,
It is in the English language, it's in the Oxford English Dictionary. As an educator, okay, hold. Yeah.
You were asked, would you refer to me using they them pronouns? You said, no, I wouldn't. When asked why, you said, because I don't think it's a solution. When I brought up that it was basic respect and so on, what you said was, oh, I wouldn't do it if I was like coerced or whatever you said. Somebody literally just asked, would you do this for me? And you said, no, I would not show you that respect. I would not extend that amount of dignity to you.
That's not what I
Yes,
said.
you said
None of these are
Nobody asked anything about if I came like with a club and asked you to like use certain
What
pronouns
makes
to
you
refer to
think?
me.
What makes
But
you
I just asked, would you refer to me if it wasn't for this law? And I asked you to refer to me with they them pronouns, would you? And your answer was no.
Now if I was compelled to.
But we're saying if you weren't.
You said no, and then when I started asking you about, you said it wasn't a solution. When you were asked, what is it not a solution to? You said something vague. We said it's about basic respect, and then you said no if I was compelled to. So no, when you were just asked, as a matter of respect, in fact, would you refer to a trans person who asked you to use they them pronouns, a pronoun which has a several
Not if I was
hundred-year
compelled
historical
to.
background?
That's not what we're talking about.
Yes, it is because
We
it's
just,
legislation.
we're saying if it wasn't legislation.
I gotta stop guys. Look, there's too many of you.
Okay, one simple
I've had
question.
enough. Sorry, I
Not
can't hear
seriously,
you.
one simple question.
No, I'm done.
I thought we were statistically irrelevant.
If it was
Yeah, I mean, like,
law,
I don't
and a
exist.
trans person asked you, would you please refer to me by they and them pronouns? Would you refer to me by their pronouns? So no.
I do have the authority to determine
Please
whether or
refer
not
to me
there
Why
was.
do I have the
Why
authority
do you
to
have the
determine what I say?
Why do
What
you have,
kind of question
why do
is
you have
that?
the authority? Let me finish. Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not an individual is worthy of you using their pronouns? Like, if I asked you, would you please use they them pronouns for me? What?
It would depend on what
What hoops do you want us to jump through?
Those are my pronouns. Those are my
There's no
pronouns.
motivation.
No, I know no one ever has any motivation.
We're trying to survive. Politics are a product of our lives and of trying to live in this world. We're not trying to live in this world as a product of our politics. I was apolitical before I came out as trans. I got into politics because I needed to survive, to advocate against people like you, no offense. I have one quick question. Okay, so they them pronouns are written into the Oxford English Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. It's actually the word of the year this year, and it does have historical continuity all the way back to Shakespeare. It is objectively an English word, singular they pronouns, grammatically correct. Do you think that you can choose to not respect something that is in the English language as a professor, as an academic, that you are going to you're ignoring rules of the English language to go out of your way to disrespect students?
That's your opinion, and I'm not going
It
to
is my opinion.
disrespect students.
We're saying it's disrespectful to us.
You don't get to decide what's disrespectful to us.
Wow. Yo, Kick, you still hanging out, bro?
God bless you on this fine day, X. God has this here island of...
My mana is gone.
You restore my faith in humanity, you.
There it is. Fuck. Damn.
Come to me, Exile. Let us speak of death and desire.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I got lost in a Joe Rogan podcast, so it lasted 3 hours. So I ended up staying up the whole 3 hours, and now I'm finishing a mission. And after this mission, I'm done. Though I say that, and I said that after the last fucking mission I finished. So I can't 100% commit to that, apparently. But I'm gonna try, because it is daylight outside. So I really should go to sleep. Like, straight up, I should go to sleep. Because it's already gonna be hard as fuck for me to go to sleep. But the sun's already up, so, you know, what the hell. What you doing? You about to go to class or something? Ah, right on. That's always a safe option to make sure you can get back. So what happens if you don't have a ride?
Speak. Return, if you must. Return if you must. What? Exiles. What? Travel far. What troubles you bring now? return if you must.
My puppy dog's saying it's time to go to sleep.
You killed another 8-leg? Old 3-eye?
No, killed that bitch.
The tree that Yena calls Larata is the only thing standing between piety and whatever awaits behind that ancient gateway to the northwest. Melagaro's spike.
Welcome.
Alright, goddammit. It's time for me to go to sleep. Yeah. It has become that time. Oh, shit. Alright, Michaela, I will see you tomorrow. Or later today. Alright, check.